nice food will be.
Active work of the India government where there is a purpose to have one nation theory to be put into practice, where Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan will exist. I think we need to address this also when we speak of sustainable community and peace. Number two, as regards displacement, the act which was enacted in 2013, Resettlement and Free and Fair Compensation and Undertaking Act, is also being amended, at least in Jharkhand, and the displaced people would have got also seems to be done away with. Now, these are hard realities. I suppose we should take this into account when we speak of sustainable community and peace. Thank you.
If it is just a observation, just leave it. Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. Short questions.
The villages, if you travel in China and you travel in India, in China they go for urbanization. 50% of the people, they need to go to urbanization because they say they can bring better public goods to the people when they live in cities than when they are in remote areas. So as far as I understood, there is some different meaning here or a different approach in India. Which one is the best and why, and which one is the more sustainable?
Yeah. So here, here this is sustainability, sustainable communities and peace. So China and any other scientific and advanced economy, all these things, the sustainability, if you put denominator sustainability, then lot of question comes. Here, it's simple, sustainable, and there is enormous things is left over for the future generation. That's why the whole design of Gandhi and Gandhian based of thinking, simple, it talks about leaving something for the future. Something for another 75 years or 100 years. My own son, my own granddaughter will be having the water, will be having good air, will be having good thing to eat. That kind of things. Again, any energy-centric, huge energy-centric, huge, that kind of thing, it's again a problem. Global warming, all the complications are there. So that's why, for Indian context, still the hope is there. Still the rivers are there. Still water is there. But lot of disturbance are coming in. So how to stop it? For that, this kind of model, simple, sustainable model. Mahatma Gandhi's vision is seeing a permanent smile in the faces of everybody of this country. For that, this kind of things are advocated.
One more.
This is just an observation, as Nat referred to the languages of two, from the top down or the global side and from the bottom. Very interestingly, what I observe is there are, of course, 17 goals and 169 targets, but there are 304 indicators. So when we get to the indicators, they actually merge. What Elango is referring to and what the SDG goals are referring to, the indicators, of course, only 16% of those indicators are AAA graded. Many are still not very clear. But there are many indicators which tend to actually talk about what Elango on the ground is talking about. But the other comment is if Elango, or if we could know more about what Elango is actually doing in the village in order to meet those resources, that's very interesting part of it. He has 17 processing units within his village. So most of the resources are actually decentralized and generated within. So that's another part, if we had time or we could hear from him, that would have been interesting.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for this wonderful session. Both the speakers, thank you very much, and wonderful audience, thank you very much.
Sit down. May I request Professor Phillips to present the mementos, please? Yeah. Thank you. Friends, we shall break now. Before we go for the tea, there will be a group photograph. Shall we all assemble near the reception? I will take you there. So before that main building, then we'll have a group photograph, then come back for tea, then continue the session. Yeah, please come. All right. So, dear friends, thank you once again. We are going to start the next session. In fact, the final panel session of the 25th World Forum of IAJBS. Again, just to reconnect, we started with the idea of flourishing. Then we went on to look at how do we create a flourishing business school. Then we went on to looking at how do we create a flourishing world. Then, of course, we looked at what is the role for business schools in building peace. Of course, the panel emphasized the need for looking at compassion as a central theme if you want to create a peaceful world. And there cannot be any flourishing world if there is no peace and compassion. And finally, we have a big challenge. We live in a world of technology which is changing very, very fast. So therefore, the kind of world that we live in the era of fast-changing technology, is creating a flourishing world possible? Can technology be an enabler, or it is a hindrance? I think that's a question that we are going to address. So for this, we have two distinguished panel members. One is Mr. Tony Henshaw. He is the Chief Sustainability Officer. And then we have Mr. Pradeep Mehta. He is the Managing Trustee of and Honorary Chairman of Central Himalayan Institute for Nature and Applied Research. Shall we give a big hand to both of them, please? I shall take a couple of minutes to introduce both of them. Just a small announcement. Unfortunately, we don't have the privilege of having Mr. Manpreet Singh, Director Advisory Climate Change and Sustainability from KPMG. His wife happened to fall ill yesterday, so therefore he expressed his inability to attend. So we really will miss him. Mr. Tony Henshaw holds a BSc Honours in General Engineering from University of Leicester, England, 1981, and a MBA with distinction from Manchester Business School, England, 1988. He is a seasoned business and sustainability professional with more than 27 years of global experience in sustainability strategy for a low-carbon marketplace, working in a diverse international space. Mr. Henshaw brings along vast expertise in driving sustainability development for leading multinational corporations, organizations, and Fortune 500 companies. Prior to joining the Aditya Birla Group as Chief Sustainability Officer, he worked in India for the Vedanta Group. His earlier assignments include working as Chief Sustainability Officer with Cemex SA, Mexico, and senior management posts at Transrens SA in Bolivia, that is Shell company. He has developed a, sir, we have two delegates from Bolivia. Okay, right. He has developed a pragmatic sustainable business strategy that accesses current best practice with the needs of the global trends to identify areas for transformational investment. He also serves on the board of Strategic Advisory Academic Board of our school, that is Xavier School of Sustainability. So shall we give one more round of applause to the Henshaw. Our next speaker is Dr. Pradeep Mehta. He holds a doctorate in forestry and has been working in the field of environmental sustainability for approximately 2 decades. He livelihoods of mountain communities. He is member of different IUCN commissions. He has a long list of organizations where he is a member. He also serves on our Strategic Academic Advisory Board of Xavier School of Sustainability. So welcome, Dr. Mehta, once again. So with these few words of introduction, I hand over to Mr. Henshaw.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Professor Pepin. Thank you very much, Professor Paul, for your very kind invitation today. It's great to be here. I love to come to universities because I think that's where we have an opportunity to ask difficult questions and to think about things. Y a mis amigos de Bolivia, bienvenido, mucho gusto y vamos a encontrar más tarde. I believe you said there's a couple of people from Bolivia, right? So, hola, ¿cómo estás? So, okay, what we'd like to do this morning is talk about technology. And it was when I was in Bolivia working with a group of Aymara indigenous peoples close to Santa Cruz, that one of the leaders came up to me and he said, you know, hey, Tony, who owns technology? I thought it was a really profound question, because generally business owns technology. We have a very complicated system of patents where people can protect technology and then monetize it. And a whole lot of business is based on that technology, whether it be a particular product or a process technology. And he was really interested in how do I then get hold of this? And how do I bring technology into the people here in close to Santa Cruz? How do I actually do that? And we talked about joint ventures and getting people to come and invest. And people are usually willing to invest. So today what we want to do is talk a little bit about some questions that I think will be worthy of reflection. A little bit about what we've been doing at ABG, and I'll race through that fairly quickly. And then Dr. Mehta and I will have since there's only two of us, a bit of a tennis match back and two. One of the things that Professor Pepin didn't say to you this morning is that Dr. Mehta loves to play table tennis, so that's going to be great. But he's also a mimic, so I'm expecting to speak to Prime Minister Modi later on, and at least see how that goes. So, okay, well, a couple of slides that I picked up over the years. I know you're all sustainability experts, but the first question I'd like you to ponder on is, will sustainability build a sustainable world? I started in this after an oil spill in Bolivia, the Desaguadero oil spill, which I was the incident commander for the cleanup. And I came across sustainability as I was working to improve the management systems. I'm an engineer. I have a business background. I know very little about environment. I know even less about social. But I've been in some odd places around the world. So everything I talk about comes from just a practical experience. I have no formal education in environment or social. But after the oil spill, we started to look at the business and ask what we needed to do to actually make it sustainable, because having had an oil spill, we'd end up spending $45 million in about 8 months and virtually bankrupted the business. And the board asked us all, they said, you know, you're experts, you've been here a long time, 200 years of experience. How is it that you didn't know it was going to rain? And how is it you didn't maintain the pipeline? How is it that your management systems are not helping you do that? And so that changed my job then from finance to looking at the management systems. And I've taken that as we've gone forward to my personal view of sustainability. And that is not sustainability because I still struggle with the definition, but how do I build a sustainable business? And we've defined that as one that will survive and thrive as we go forward through the changes of the next 10, 20, 30, and 40 years. So a couple of slides. I think you all know the population of the planet. It took till 1800 to reach 1 billion people. Now we're at 7.5 billion. Used to be 9 billion by 2050. Now people are talking about 10 billion. And it was Gro Brundtland back in '87 who said, well, maybe at some point we're going to outstrip the planet's ability to support us. Another slide on the same topic, which really floored me when I saw it is that more than half of those 7.5 billion people live in this white circle, which kind of is why I christened India the epicenter of sustainability. Because if we can't learn from the way 1.3 billion people live on a subcontinent that is losing water very rapidly, and how we actually work together and how we actually find ways to innovate, how we actually implement new technologies, then we're going to be stuck with a difficult situation. Folks outside that circle are going to be watching people in terrible circumstances, or they're going to be inviting them over. Sociopolitically, I'll let you guys ponder on either of the two, but neither seem to be very sustainable for the future. So we need to figure out, how do we actually manage this situation? I'm a big fan of Johan Rockström at the Stockholm Resilience Center. I struggle with 304 measures, 169 targets, and 17 goals. I'm an engineer, I kind of need priorities, and I need to have something to work on. And so my simple philosophy is, if we can keep these 4, 5, 6 global systems in check, then we get time to figure out the rest. We may not do it as fast as we should, we may not do it as efficiently as we should, but at least we get time. If we allow climate change to run uncontrolled, or we pollute the oceans so that we end up with no food, no fish, unhealthy oceans, if we kill biodiversity at the rate we're killing it, which is 100 times the natural rate, and if we don't control the nitrogen cycle, we're going to end up with a planet that actually isn't very habitable. And then we'll be in a chaotic scenario, and that's going to be very difficult to manage a lot of the things that we all dream should happen. I think we know this from Paris. This was from the Washington Post. We're currently on the brown trajectory, the top one going up. The promises that everyone gave, if they meet them, puts you on the center trajectory, somewhere towards 3 and 4 degrees, which for India is catastrophic. And even if we hit the blue line, which requires us to power all of our new businesses by renewable power, but also to cannibalize a lot of our old power supplies, which is quite difficult. And we'll talk a little bit later about the legacy trap that we're all in, at least financially. Why would I knock down a perfectly good coal-fired power station and build a new one with solar panels to give me the same electrons? It doesn't make much economic sense. So how do I get out of that legacy trap? But interestingly enough, the blue line means that India will have 40% less drinking water in 2040 than it has today. I wrote a paper, I co-authored a paper, I'll show you at the end if you're interested. It's on our website, called Coping with the 2-Degree World. And most people don't understand this is the world we're actually planning to build. This isn't the worst case, this is actually the case. So people need to understand the effect of actually hitting a 2-degree world, but worse, if we don't hit a 2-degree world, we have some major issues coming our way. And this is one of my favorite graphs. I look at it every day. It's a lot of squiggly lines, but it's actually the sea ice on the planet for the last 40 years. And if you look, you see at the top the yellows and the lighter colors. They were back in the 80s. And then you start to see some of the darker colors, which are more current. And the current situation, as of yesterday, we are here, which is something like 250,000 square kilometers of sea ice, lower than we've ever had before, but had in the last 40 years. And so you can see that trend going on and on as we continue. This is climate risk. No surprising when I overlay it with where all the people are, that we have a major issue. And it's quite interesting for me, and I can kind of say this, I'm from the UK. I grew up near Manchester, but my wife is from Atlanta. So I can say as a European and kind of quasi-American, we've got it good. We really do. We have the best land, we've got the most resources, and the less pressure on our lifestyles. But as we continue to go forward, the issues are going to start to become fundamentally apparent inside the circle. And that's where we're going to start to see and really have to experiment and transform and change the way we operate. Sadly, this is Indian's monsoon tracker. This is ABG's monsoon tracker. We're 20% down this year so far, which is currently a lot better than 43% down that it was a month ago. But we're already just starting to see the effects of climate change. And we need to think about new business models and new ways to operate. So I put your question to you, what is a business? My logic is it's a group of people, and we can take this for XIMB as well. It's a group of people. It's a whole lot of assets, and Professor Paul was just telling me that after the last cyclone, several crores of assets were destroyed, but nonetheless, it's a group of assets. It's a group of operating instructions. How do we operate? Who turns up at what lecture when? Who cleans? Who does the maintenance? How do we recruit? And we offer a product or service. In XIMB's case, it's education. In Aditya Birla Group's case, it's everything from cement and concrete through aluminium, through other products that we produce. But I think it's really interesting to note that the culture that we create requires that system plus leadership. We need to have a focused leadership. We're starting to see it come forward, but of course we're pretty much fragmented into different countries. And as we start to see a unified leadership, my concern is we don't see it until we're in the chaotic scenario. And then leadership will appear, but it may not be the leadership that we want. And we'll have to understand where that comes from. So here we are, we have a culture, we have leadership, and we have a system. And basically, when you want a safety culture, you need leadership to focus on safety and to drive those systems. If you want a sustainable culture, the same thing applies. If you want a despotic culture, I don't know, a very short investigation, the cost isn't very high. But the amount of waste, noise, water use, energy use, carbon dioxide production, when you add up all of the value chains, Aditya Birla plus Tatas plus GE plus XIMB plus everybody else, XUB, we're starting to impact the planetary system well sustainable. And our conclusion, and Mr. Birla's conclusion, is it's not. And if that's true, and this represents the space in which we get to operate in, then we have to drive that primary system with all the side effects and the tertiary governance within this green band. And this is what, for me, defines a civil society. We have the rule of law. We may bump up against it a few times. We have mechanisms for bringing us back in line. But nonetheless, that's kind of how things work. But if the previous statement is true, that it's not good enough for a sustainable world, then by 2030 and 2050, we have to get our value chains within these small spaces. And that is by no means an easy task. It means two things. One, getting a lot better, but in many cases, completely transforming our business models. Money generally goes either to grow your business or maintain it or to pay a dividend. As I said with the legacy trap, not much money goes towards transforming your business for it to do exactly the same thing. So we need to look carefully at how we actually help business get through and do this. So in terms of signposts to 2030, we picked international standards. They're documented. For a company of 120,000 people, for me it's very interesting that it isn't Tony says, it's just international standards where a lot of clever people have come together. This requires basically a mindset change for business. You can meet the law through command and control. you can't meet international standards without a systemic approach. And so creating those systems has been something we've been working on a lot at ABG. It's not good enough to walk around and say, hey, don't walk on the roof, you may fall off. You have to have a process where people have a permit, they're trained, they understand the whole system, people, assets, and processes operate to keep that person safe. And then the pivot in this model is best practice. So we have a system, we improve it, we stop people being hurt, we reduce our CO2, and we get to best practice. The question for me is best practice today good enough for the sustainable world of 2030 and 2050? The most efficient diesel engine, I think everyone's agreed, is never going to be efficient enough for zero CO2. The most efficient power plant that uses coal will not be acceptable in the world of 2050 and beyond. So we have two things to do. The first we've called responsible stewardship, which is about improving our systems, bringing in the best technologies, getting to best practice, and moving through this system, through this funnel. And then analyzing what does the funnel mean. And for the case of the issues that Johan Rockström has outlined in particular, asking ourselves, what is the target? Are our businesses likely to be sustainable? Do we have to completely retool them? Do we have to move them? Many of our plants are in very, very water-stressed areas in India. What do? We can't not use water. Do we move the plant and leave the people behind? Do we change the product that the plant makes? So then you start to make strategic decisions in order to start to future-proof not only yourself, but all of these things that I talked about are actually going to happen to our supply chain as well. And I think Rubena talked earlier on about should we have human rights management in the supply chain. I was at a conference in New York where somebody asked the same question, and everybody unanimously stood up and said, absolutely. And me being me, I stood up and said, I had just one question. Does anyone know where their supply chain is? I know where I buy my water bottle from, the local store, and they know they buy it from Kinley, that are made in some place where people don't look too closely about the human rights and the effluent production. We need to actually develop tools that it's very much in its infancy. But we really do need to know outside that little primary line that I see, where does it all come from and where? Concluded that a sustainable business is one that can survive within the needs and constraints of a sustainable world. But if that's true, then a sustainable world can only contain sustainable businesses, which means we're heading for a shakeout of a lot of businesses. Because those in water-stressed areas that can't continue to operate, those using chemicals which have to be banned, those producing CO2 for which they can't afford a carbon price, will have to go. And that can be orderly, hopefully it will be, but if it starts to become disorderly, or fail, we've concluded that a sustainable value chain is one, you know where it is, strategically planning where we in shopkeepers, law, a few of but for a sustainable world, we really need over the coming 10, 20, 30 years. Mr. Birla started this off before I joined the company 7 years ago. He had the vision for us to become the leading Indian conglomerate for sustainable business practices across all our global operations. And we've made some progress, not a huge amount, but not as much as I'd like, but we've certainly made some progress. So if you're interested, on our website, sustainability.adityabirla.com, we have our first sustainable business report and the paper that I mentioned before, Coping with a 2-Degree World. So both of those are available, and I'd be very happy to discuss or have your comments. So with that, we said before what we would do is maybe open it up to a quick Q&A from you guys, and then we'll move into our question and answer as we go forward. So thank you.
So any question from the audience first? Yeah, please, Dr. Nair.
Okay.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I just have one small query. At the end, you mentioned that the Birla Group has tried to do many good things towards sustainability, but not to your expectation. How much is, I mean, what percentage of that we want to talk about sustainability design? We
Empathize with you with the students. It's a tough one, and the glass is half full or half empty. I can point to the fact that we have the first Sustainable Business Report, which was one of the 8 targets I agreed with Mr. Birla. We have a framework of policies, standards and guidelines which is certified to 16 international standards, so we know where we're going. We've created an IT system to question all our businesses, and we've changed the assurance protocol from me coming to your factory and trying to find out where you're wrong to you proving to group that you're actually doing things right through an IT system, which has given us great bandwidth. So we've made lots of progress there. We've seen good improvements. We don't have a target price for carbon. We have an 80 million ton carbon footprint. So we still have a way to go to get some of the leaders to understand, and really I empathize with them as well, because they're also caught in the legacy trap. What would you like me to do, Tony? Knock down my power station and build a new one? Why would I do that? We already owe $200 million to the bank. Maybe I can run it for 10 years. Yes, okay, well then what's our target for carbon reduction? That is a particularly difficult one. We've spent a lot of time mapping water in India. We've helped the World Business Council with the India Water Tool. But now we're starting to see the results of that. We're then having to question, what do we do with our plants? Can we change what they make so they don't use water if they're in a water-stressed area? What will that cost? Because again, not necessarily a great investment to take all the machinery from here and put it there, and put all the machinery from there here, just because there's no water. In terms of the strict finance and the financial economic model, it doesn't make a lot of sense. We have had some progress with risk. The future-proofing piece has really turned down into enterprise risk management. What are the risks to your business going forward? Can you operate in the world of 2030? What are the trends? And so we're still going through a huge amount of education. So I can be proud of those things, but I would like the mindset to have changed. I'd like to have a target price, a target CO2 reduction plan. I'd like to have rolled out much more things. I'd like to know where my supply chain is. A lot of things that we still have to work on.
So I understand you're hoping for some rules and regulations, at least on your CO2. Now, my question is the following. Suppose a country or a group of countries, let's say the European Union, would make very stringent legislation, and maybe together with China, these two, that they cahoots, that they would make a very stringent legislation on what is supposed to come into the country, and that would affect the supply chains, because you have legals and implementable, and so the companies, especially the multinationals, they have to comply. Would that be a solution to the questions of the business, and would that drive sustainability forward?
My view is legislation and regulation like that is exactly what we need to do. It's not necessarily just a law, you cannot use CO2, but certainly trade law is one of the biggest risks we have. We manage and we own a lot of forests in Canada. We bring pulp to India, create fiber, create viscose staple fiber, make clothes and export them back to Europe. If that is not acceptable, because of the chemicals in the process or because of the energy we use, then that will drive change. And I tend to think that is the way. The legacy trap I was talking about before, really we saw with Kyoto of people trying to pay for people to do better, and it gets incredibly expensive. The legacy trap, if you imagine that you don't own a car, you can choose a diesel car or an electric car. It's not a big subsidy to persuade you to buy the electric car, a little bit of moral persuasion, and you can move over. But if you already own a diesel car, that's what I was just saying, and you owe the bank, and it's perfectly good, and there's still diesel in the pumps, why would you throw it away and buy an electric car? It makes no sense to a person, to a business, to anybody. And that legacy trap, it's the legacy things we've already created, which is creating the 50 billion tons of CO2. We can build the new businesses with solar power. Many of the IT industry is already solar powered. It's not that hard to do it. But to take an aluminium smelter in India where it's not connected to the grid, where it has a coal-fired power station, and disconnect it and then say I'll put a solar power when I don't have the technology of batteries and I still owe $200 million on the power plant, becomes a different challenge altogether. And it's that challenge that I think we have to solve. It's relatively easy to persuade people for new businesses. New hotels have to be highly efficient. New homes have to be highly insulated. Sorry? I didn't hear.
Phase it out.
You have to phase it out. There is that process. The issue is the time scale and the scale. You know, what we've already built is huge, and to phase it out and recycle it, 30% of all CO2 has to go by 2030. So that's 10 years away. 50% has got to go by 2050. That phasing out, when you have 20 and 30-year depreciation cycles, is really difficult.
Can we take last question?
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
not
sure.
a question. I have a question I will ask at the end. Maybe we could request Dr. Mehta to make his observation because we are running short of
Sure,
time. Yeah?
sure. Why don't we do that?
Okay. I will ask my question at the end. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question we had, and we've talked a little bit about, people assume that technology can save the world. So is technology more important than legislation and the management of trade? And how do we then motivate technology transformation? Countries like India with 1 billion people, technology replaces labor very often. How do we actually manage that situation?
Yeah, see, first, when we say that, people think that technology will save the world, well, the world is going to be there. Whether humans will be there or not, that is a question. And whatever technologies that we have, innovated in the past, and we can see the results. And for the survival of the world, including humans, I think we need air, we need food, and we need water. Air, to some extent, now we have started facing problems, especially in India. Say, in the past 5 years, it's a big concern. But I think through technological interventions, we can control it to some extent. But when it comes to soil and our food, so like in 1950s, when the Green Revolution came, and we wanted to, feed the number of people, and it was for the good. And what the impacts happened after, say, 3 decades or so, we can see that the soil, the quality of the soil has depleted. In Punjab, you see, where people have started using fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides. The soil quality has depleted so much. Now the input cost is more to maintain that production. And at the same time, we stopped using, our traditional things like the manure that the bio compost and everything that we used to put in there. And the entire Tarai belt, means the foothills of the Himalayas, was so fertile because the ecosystem services, there are rich alluvial soil deposited there for millions of years. And then we made this, innovations to get maximum out of it. And soil is like a bank, if you just take the interest, you can sustain it. But what we wanted is, even from the savings, we wanted to take maximum within, few years. And now in Punjab especially, there is a huge problem of health because the groundwater has polluted because of the chemicals, fertilizers, and you can't get that output. And then coming to water, which is a major problem, I think many of the previous speakers, they have also focused on water. If you see the water table, I'll give you the example of Delhi. The wells in Delhi near Qutub Minar during the Mughal period, if you see their depth, it is hardly 12 feet deep. 12 feet, so means at that time, few centuries ago, the water was at that level. And if you visit Delhi today, we have two metro stations, two tier of metro station below the ground. So you can imagine, though it became an opportunity that we have a transport system out down there, but the water problem is a huge problem. Similarly, like when we say that, the laymen, they think that the problem is not huge because they are just seeing the tip of the iceberg on top. They don't see what's the problem. And it's mainly the city people who think that there is no problem. We are talking about climate change, right? And scientists also, they play with words. So we talk about 2 degrees rise in temperature. But that 2 degrees rise in temperature is the average rise. It's not going to happen universally everywhere. And the impact of climate change we can already see in the Himalayas and the mountains, where you cannot grow apples in the in Himachal Pradesh in the lower belt because of the rise in temperature over there. So that rise is not 2 degrees, it's more than that. And again, the snowfall depletion. So there it is easy to adapt with technologies because there is already something happening downstream. So in the mountains, you can adapt those kind of technologies and you can survive. But things, when it will happen at plains level, say in places like Bhubaneswar, Delhi and other places, we won't be able to cope with that. So that is again. And when we say, again, coming to agriculture and all, so every species, they have their importance. And when we innovated with chemicals, monocropping and all these things, we forgot that there are other important players in in agriculture, like the pollinators. Nobody thought of bees. And now it is becoming a huge issue even in the mountains, where they are hiring the bees for pollination. And they are paying for that, ecosystem services, which was free of cost. Same as in California, where, almond growers, they have to hire the bees just to maintain the productivity. So I think, we need technological interventions, but at the same time, we need to see the whole iceberg, the problem, the risk. It's not only a small risk that we have to target, but we have to see what will be the environmental impacts, what will be the social impacts of whatever we innovate. So then only we can do. And talking about water, so water, though we say, there is 70% of water on Earth, but out of that 70% of water, the accessible water is only 0.007%. That's just a drop of water in a bucket. And that too, we have polluted so much. And technologies like, tube wells and pumps, we innovated that. So most of our cities are on borrowed water. Underground water, and that well. And we need to innovate wisely. Otherwise, the creator will innovate soon, and maybe we are not a part of that list.
Learnings and implement them at scale. I mean, some farmers obviously are very successful, others are maybe not. How do we promote that ability for everybody to get knowledge? Can technology help us? I mean, we have the internet.
You also mentioned in your presentation, people and they're using it, they don't know the impact of those technologies. Sensitization, what kind of impact it is going to. They need to see the entire iceberg, just not the tip. And I think, that can motivate footprints and less impact on the environment.
So motivate people
and they all have to work together to come up with these kind of technologies. And especially in the West, where there are legislations people follow, but especially in a country like India, even we have legislations, it's difficult to follow. So that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've been looking at is the use of technology for implementation of the law. The use of the Aadhaar cards for the Indian government to be able to assess where they collect taxes from. The use of satellites for mapping and water and those kind of things. Should they be freely available, or is it something the government should develop and put in? I mean, how do we get these things to scale? Because as I watched the Aadhaar card develop and then link to your bank, then your phone number, and then there was a rebellion in terms of privacy. It makes sense to link everything together and then say, you know, do you pay the right taxes? The computer calculates it, especially at a scale of 1 billion people. But how do we manage those things going forward, given the short time scale that we have?
Well, I think, you know, we have the right of information as well, the right to information. So at part of it, I think especially the educational institutions and planners, researchers, if the government thinks that, you know, it has to be restricted, but then I think the access, we need to identify to whom we could give this access so it can be used. That's the thing. Because if the technology has to be used, I think it should be accessible as well.
So thanks. I just got a message. I know it's fast approaching lunchtime. Professor Pepin suggested we open it up, and I know you have a vested interest with your question. I think it's really interesting the way we have to start to use, we have the best technology. You've heard us talking about technology and what we might need to do. What do you guys think?
Yes, thank you, Tony. The deliberation was very one of the research activities in the supply chain. And the top 4 are the imposition of the strict government rules and regulations. And number 2 is the commitment of the top management of these enterprises. Number 3 is the organization culture. And the 4th important point is the use of technology, and because they are more worried about the ROI on the investment on the technology, and because they are using the technology to meet the demand of the customer. So how to make a balanced trade-off? I do not know whether the carbon taxing would be the right solution. Okay, and the second thing is that how do you address sustainability of the vendors? Or how do you ensure sustainability at the vendor end? Because that's the case Walmart is doing. You do not accept a vendor who is not adopting the sustainability practices. What is the typical Indian context? Thank you.
I think for me the issue is the definition of sustainability and green. I think we've been hijacked a little bit by the marketeers. I can't find a definition of a green product. And so I don't know what it means. So I think we have to do some serious work in actually building up the correct lexicon. I think we started with the triple bottom line and everyone assumed we could change business completely. I think maybe we now need to look at how do we modify the business models we have to make them sustainable, but not necessarily throw out the baby with the bathwater.
I have a question. We have been discussing, and the focus of a lot of businesses and even organizations is really carbon reduction, and it makes sense. You know, moving to renewable energy, changing the way we do things for individuals, more of lifestyle changes. But one of the things that I was wondering if it is possible for big business to invest in is the technology of carbon capture. We have always been looking at how we can minimize our emissions, and that's fine. But there's also the technology of carbon capture, which individuals cannot do. But this is an area of technology where perhaps big businesses can come in, because that's a huge investment, etc. And that might even look at how you can transition legacy businesses or something like that. So what do you think about that?
I'm very skeptical, to be honest. I used to work in the oil industry. We can capture CO2 and we can bury it and we can use it for enhanced oil recovery. But I go to many conferences and I hear the oil companies say, look, there's a huge gap in the carbon curve. We'll just capture it and bury it. 50 billion tons. The average plant is 1 million tons. So we need 50,000 plants with associated pipe work, places to bury it, to go forward. We also need insurance, sovereign guarantees, because what happens if it comes out of the ground and all that kind of stuff. And I usually ask the question to the oil industry, how many of these plants do we have if we need 50,000? I think the current answer is about 21. And most of them capture it and then release it back into the atmosphere because they're experimental plants. So pure carbon capture is very different. Carbon use, the issue then is chemistry. I'm not an organic chemist, but CO2 is very stable. You burn things, get energy out, and you end up with CO2. You need a lot of energy, I think, to be able to put it back, or you need nature. You need photosynthesis and what have you. And the problem then is always scale. People say to me, you know, can you make cement out of seashells? Of course we can, but not 3 billion tons a year. And the problem then comes the scale, the same as sequestration. We didn't really get onto forests and how we control the forest sinks. But if a hectare takes out a carbon, 50 billion hectares is 6 times the land mass of the planet. So again, because we do things at an industrial scale, it's the scale of response that we need. I hope they can come up with something, but I've been doing this for 15, 20 years, and I think when I started, the number of plants was about 16, and now it's 21. So. Anybody else have a final, one last question? Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, and I'd like to maybe link, sorry, is it audible?
Yeah.
All right, thanks for sharing your thoughts. I'd like to link what you said about child labor with the theme, which is about technological transformation. And I think one of the things is, without meaning in any way to condone child labor, I think the conversation is a little more nuanced than black and white, because it doesn't operate in a vacuum, but in the absence of opportunities for those children who have nothing else to do, or else they might be in a worse situation. So I was wondering, you know, forced child labor apart, is there any way technology can actually have a role in providing alternative opportunities to children who might otherwise find themselves forced to enter, you know, child labor? I was just wondering if you had any thoughts. This is sort of maybe a left field question, but yeah, just a thought experiment.
Do you want to have a go? I think we could talk a long time about child labor, obviously. As a subset of human rights, first of all, we need to understand where it is. My view of a sustainable world is it's actually a highly controlled world. We have a tool where we look at the symptoms of human rights abuse and then ask ourselves, do they occur in the country, in the location, within our company, to try to build a risk and then take actions. Because it's quite difficult to have a plant manager understand. Did you have child labor? No, I don't think so. What about your supply chain? I don't really know. What about the drivers who live in their trucks with their kids and have the kids unload? Difficult. So it's a very complex topic. We're still at the early stages of trying to develop tools to help educate people about the general topics, not necessarily the specific ones. But certainly technology, if I could say you chip every child, you could then monitor them and all the rest of it. Swedes are well ahead. They're chipping themselves so they can pay their supermarket bill with a chip that's embedded in their arm. So the technology's there. The question is more about the moral issues and whether people would accept it. Okay, well, maybe a quick summary. Thank you, Dr. Mehta. I really appreciate it. I realize I probably hogged a little bit too much of the panel, but anyway. I think it's really interesting what you talked about, biomimicry. There's an awful lot we can learn from nature. I think there's a huge amount we have to do with forests, but I still come back to the question, we all jumped on the triple bottom line. Is it really the right model? Does it really move big things? Does it really change things? Businesses have always, or CSOs have always had the problem that you go and see the CEO and he says, well, tell me about sustainability. And you say, well, environment. He says, well, I obey the law and we plant some trees. Social, well, I have a huge CSR program. Okay, see you next year. And it's not actually changing the business management systems that cause the problems. And I think we could do an awful lot to focus business and maybe take some of the lessons from nature and bring them into business to actually make sure that we're not producing side effects, that we're not producing waste, we're actually recycling it the same way nature does. And we really start to work for those circular economies. So thanks very much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Mehta, you want to say a few concluding words? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pepin, and thank you, Tony, and thank you all for being a patient listener. Well, it was really good to know, the strategy of Aditya Group, especially how you see supply chain, because most of the CSR activities are mainly, on social issues, and it is just for the compliance issue, they do the activities. But when you make your supply chain sustainable, I think you are following the right model, and I think that is the approach which other businesses should follow. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so may I request Dr. Alexander to come and present the mementos to our speakers, please. Thank you, Mr. Hensa, and thank you, Dr. Mehta, for your time and sharing your valuable thoughts with us. Thank you very much. I have a quick announcement. Number one is about the parallel sessions, which will begin as planned as given in the schedule. So I'm just mentioning the name of the chair, Dr. Vivek Patil. He is here, I suppose. Yeah, thank you. So you will be in CH1. Right? Then we have Dr. Elena. Yes, thank you. So you will be in conference hall 2. Then we have Dr. Marnilika, she's here. Okay, she's out. Okay, right. Then we have Dr. Chandan Jha is here. Yeah, is there? He must be around. Okay, right. Well, we don't have Dr. Ignacio, probably he had some work outside. So in his place, I am requesting Mr. Ilango to chair the session, please. This is a session on sustainable communities and peace. So that will be held in classroom number 3 in the first floor. My student volunteers will take you. So with this, we close the discussion, all the 5 panel discussion. And the academic part of the conference will end by 1:30. Then 1:30 we all will come for lunch. Then again we will assemble here at 2:15 p.m. here in this auditorium for the remaining part of the events that are planned already. Okay? Thank you. Please proceed to the conference hall and classrooms for the parallel discussions, please. faculty, management, both the UG and PG students, and I think the students of law school, please be here. Mr. Hensa will be speaking to you. He will be delivering a lecture now.